Calvinism is often reduced to a caricature, cold, deterministic, fatalistic, a theology that turns God into a tyrant and humanity into puppets. But that is not the Calvinism I believe in. What I want to present here is not a system built on philosophy, but a framework that emerges naturally from Scripture itself, a theology that takes seriously God's sovereignty, the depth of human sin, and the absolute necessity of grace. This is my case for Calvinism, not as a tradition, not as a label, but as the most consistent way to understand what the Bible actually teaches about salvation. The Bible does not begin with human freedom, it begins with God. Psalm 115:3 says, "Our God is in the heavens, He does all that He pleases." From Genesis to Revelation, God is not reacting to history, He is authoring it. He raises up nations and brings them down. He declares the end from the beginning. He works all things according to the counsel of His will. This includes salvation. If God is truly sovereign, then salvation cannot ultimately depend on the will of fallen human beings. It must depend on God Himself. Calvinism begins where Scripture begins, with God, not man. Calvinism does not teach that humans are as evil as they possibly could be. It teaches that sin affects every part of who we are, our minds, our desires, our wills. Jeremiah 17:9 says, "The heart is deceitful above all things." Romans 3:11 says, "And no one seeks for God." And Ephesians 2:1 says, "You were dead in your trespasses and sins." Dead people do not choose life. They do not reach out for help. They must be made alive. This is why salvation cannot begin with human choice. If it did, no one would ever be saved. Perhaps no doctrine is more offensive to modern ears than election, but Scripture is unapologetic. Ephesians 1:4 says, "He chose us in Him before the foundation of the world." And Romans 9:16 says, "It depends not on human will or exertion, but on God who has mercy." God does not choose based on foreseen faith. Faith itself is the result of His choosing. Election does not mean God is unjust. Justice would mean condemnation for all. Election is not injustice, it is mercy, and mercy by definition is never owed. Jesus did not die to make salvation possible, He died to accomplish it. Matthew 1:21 says, "He will save His people from their sins." And John 10:15 says, "I lay down my life for the sheep." The cross does not merely open a door, it secures redemption. If Christ bore the full penalty for someone's sins, then those sins cannot be punished again and again. Salvation is not hypothetical, it is effective. This is not a limitation of Christ's power, it is a declaration of its success. Calvinism does not deny the will, it explains it. We always choose according to our nature, and apart from grace, our nature is hostile to God. John 6:44, "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him." God does not drag us kicking and screaming into the kingdom, He changes our hearts. The rebels become willing, the blind begin to see, and the dead come to life. Grace is not resisted when God intends to save, it is victorious. If salvation begins with God, it must necessarily also be sustained by Him and ultimately end with Him. Philippians 1:6 says, "He who began a good work in you will bring it to completion." And John 10:28 says, "No one will snatch them out of my hand." The believer perseveres not because they are strong, but because God is faithful. This does not encourage complacency. It produces assurance, humility, and gratitude. Doesn't this destroy moral responsibility, though? No. Scripture consistently holds God's sovereignty and human accountability together. Does this make evangelism pointless? No. God ordains both the ends and the means. Isn't this unfair? Fairness would mean going to hell, but going to heaven is salvation that we receive by grace as a gift. I am a Calvinist because it takes sin seriously, it magnifies grace, It humbles man and it glorifies God. Calvinism does not ask, why doesn't God save everyone? It asks a far more biblical question, why does God save anyone? And the answer is not found in us, it is found in Him.